Hello, everyone. Welcome to the December teach-in. Thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoons with us. I see a lot of folks continuing to filter in, so we're very excited for everybody who could join us today. My name is Allie Boyd. I'm the Director of Human Rights and Advocacy here at Border Servant Corps, and we have a very special guest, Adam Isacson, who is Border Servant Corps' board member and all-around superstar in the human rights Latin American community. So we're very excited that he could join us. I'm just going to give a brief background on Adam's bio, and you can look up more on the WOLA website if you're interested. But Adam Isacson is the Director for Defense and Oversight at the Washington Office on Latin America, also known as WOLA. He has worked on defense, security, and peace building in Latin America since 1994. He now directs WOLA's Defense Oversight Program, which monitors U.S. cooperation with Latin America's security forces, as well as other security trends. Adam has worked extensively in Colombia and at the U.S.-Mexico border. He has visited the U.S.-Mexico border about 20 times. Together with WOLA's Border Security and Migration Program, he has published dozens of reports, memos, and multimedia projects about U.S. agencies, security buildup at the border, and its human impact. A prolific writer and coder, Adam has produced over 250 publications, articles, book chapters, and policy memos over the course of his career. So thank you, Adam, for joining us. We're so grateful.
Of course.
Thank you. With that, we'll begin. As always, I just want to make a brief note that if you are press, we welcome you on the call. But if you have any questions or are interested in writing anything, please contact Border Servant Corps directly. So the agenda for today is a brief update on the Annunciation House litigation. We're going to discuss a who's who in the incoming administration. We're going to touch on guardrails during the Trump second administration. And then I'm going to leave you with practical safeguarding tips before turning it over to Adam, who's going to discuss, among other things, historical trends and constraints on the Trump administration. If you're new to Border Servant Corps, we just want to orient you a little bit to our community and to what we do day to day. We run the two largest 24/7 migrant shelters in the region. We serve guests in both the state of New Mexico and in El Paso, Texas. We have 4 locations. We currently operate the Las Cruces Hospitality Center, our El Paso Hospitality Center called Vista Nueva. We also have a downtown El Paso port reception site right at the International Port of Entry. And we have a wonderful team that runs the airport navigation operation. They show up at 3 a.m. every day and help our guests on both sides of TSA. So you can imagine how intimidating it is to navigate the airport, especially if you haven't flown before. So our team at the airport is really very critical for that. We've welcomed over 150,000 guests, though I think this number might be closer to 200,000 since the last teach-in, since 2021. And we're really proud to say that we've welcomed guests from around 80 countries in the world, including our most recent country, which is Equatorial Guinea. So we've had guests from all corners of the globe, which we're very proud to say. Now turning to the Annunciation House litigation, we've discussed this in detail in prior teach-ins, but the Annunciation House litigation focuses on Annunciation House, a migrant shelter located in El Paso, Texas, that is almost 50 years old. In February, there was a knock on the door and 3 representatives from Ken Paxton's Attorney General's office were trying to obtain records from Annunciation House. There was a temporary restraining order granted, and they denied the Attorney General's request, and then things have been playing out in the courts ever since. In the course of the litigation, Annunciation House was accused of operating a stash house and being involved in human trafficking and human smuggling. Annunciation House won in the lower court, but things have been appealed up to the Texas Supreme Court. And the reason I'm touching on it today is because oral arguments before the Texas Supreme Court are going to be held in just a few weeks. So on January 13th of next year, they're going to be live streamed from the Texas Supreme Court website and their YouTube page. So if you're interested in following this litigation, or if you have been following this litigation, please tune in and show your support for Annunciation House in January. And now to discuss the main players in the Trump administration. So who are the people behind the headlines that we've all heard and seen? The first is Tom Homan. He gave a quote over a year ago that I think illustrates who he is and kind of how he's going to approach his new role. But he said, quote, "I'm going to run the biggest deportation operation this country has ever seen. 9 out of 10 people will get an order of removal based on immigration court data." So this was said in November of 2023 before we knew what was going to happen with the new administration. But since then, he's been named the border czar. But to back up a little bit, Tom Homan is a former Border Patrol agent. He actually served during the Obama administration. He was the Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Executive Associate Director of Enforcement and Removal Operations, which is a mouthful. During the first Trump administration, he was the acting ICE director, and now in the future Trump administration, he's going to be the, quote, border czar. He was a contributor to Project 2025, which we've discussed before in teach-ins, which lays out this very explicit blueprint for immigration plans during a second Trump administration. He was unfortunately involved in child separation and is credited as being, quote, the intellectual father of child separation. And when he was asked about child separation in a future Trump administration by a reporter, he responded there would be no child separation because quote, families could be deported together. So that's Tom Homan. And then we go to Stephen Miller, who was another name I'm sure many of y'all have heard about. He served in the first Trump administration. He was the senior advisor for policy, and he also was the White House director of speechwriting. He had a major role in both the Muslim travel ban that y'all probably remember from the first months of the Trump administration, and he unfortunately also had a role in the child separation policy. During the second Trump administration, he's going to serve as Deputy Chief of Staff and Homeland Security Advisor. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks extremist groups in the United States, obtained emails from Stephen Miller that actually revealed white nationalist ideology. And he has said, quote, "America is for Americans and Americans only." So that's Stephen Miller. And then we turn to Kristi Noem. She was not involved in the first Trump administration. She is known as the first female governor of South Dakota. So you might be wondering, why does she have a role in immigration or border policy? And that is because her state was the first state under her leadership to send National Guard soldiers to Texas for Operation Lone Star. And she actually sent her state's National Guard soldiers there 5 different times. She was supportive of the Muslim ban during the first Trump administration, and she did not want to accept Afghan refugees during the Afghanistan evacuation. In the second administration, though, she has been named the Secretary of DHS, and so she will work very closely with both Homan and Miller in the next administration. But like before, when we talked in November, there are some guardrails in place for this upcoming administration. We talked specifically about organizations who were going to litigate and who plan to go to court in the second Trump administration. And today, I just want to touch on the role of blue states. So the Democratic governors and attorneys general have a role and are already organizing themselves to be able to respond to Trump's policies when they come into fruition in next year. So the governors and attorneys general of the following states, California, New York, Illinois, and Massachusetts, have been really vocal. Gavin Newsom has said, quote, "The freedoms we hold dear in California are under attack, and we won't sit idle." So these governors and attorney generals are preparing to protect, importantly, immigrant communities, but not just immigrant communities. They also are going to protect the environment, LGBTQI rights, and reproductive justice, just to name a few. So they're making moves with policy and litigation through teeing up lawsuits and legislation that will be ready to go as soon as the second Trump administration takes effect. And now we're going to pivot just slightly from our normal content. So before I leave you and we turn to Adam, we wanted to leave you with a couple of digital security tips. This is a little bit of a preview for a presentation we're going to do in the new year. We're going to do a much more full-fledged presentation on digital security. But as you're moving into the new year and the new administration, a lot of folks have been asking about digital security practices. So we wanted to respond by giving you a couple of different tools to utilize. And so the first is using Signal, which is an app that you can download on your phone and even on your laptop or a desktop that can be used for text messaging in an encrypted way. The other application or tool is Treasure It, which can be used for file storage and file sharing. And then lastly, for email, we would recommend Proton Mail. But like I said, we'll touch on this in greater detail in January and February of next year. So look out for that presentation, especially if you're working at nonprofits that do work with immigrant communities or social justice work in general. And then to conclude, ways to stay up to date and involved. Like I said, we're going to have our digital security presentation at the beginning of next year. We're also going to have a navigating political change presentation, so look out for that as well. Please don't let misinformation stand. Make sure you're sharing accurate information. We say this with every presentation, and our hope is that you can take the information we're sharing today from both myself and Adam and use that to counter any misinformation you have so you can interrupt disinformation before it even takes hold. We also offer opportunities to become involved. We have direct service to systemic change opportunities. You can connect with Border Servant Corps because volunteer opportunities are going to be critical in 2025. You can join our mailing list and follow us on social media. We also recommend just a few organizations in addition to ours, the ACLU, American Immigration Council, the Texas Immigration Law Council, and WOLA, the Washington Office on Latin America. And then lastly, you can donate to ensure our critical humanitarian aid work continues. We're of course always taking donations to ensure that this work continues to go on day in, day out. At the end of the day, we're still offering humanitarian services to those who need it the most. And then lastly, we have a Good Gifts campaign, which is a way to get involved with our guests this holiday season. So you can go to our website, click on Good Gifts, and then you can select a different amount and it'll go to a different service that our guests can enjoy. So for example, if you donate $25, the Children's Happy Pack will provide a colorful backpack, a cheerful coloring book, crowns, a cozy blanket, and a cuddly stuffed animal, which are a few special items that children can use as they are continuing onward into the United States. So look out for the Good Gifts campaign as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Adam.
Okay, hello everybody, and thank you, Ali. That was great, and I do absolutely recommend using some of those security apps. I'm going to babble at you for another minute as I get the screen sharing to work, and hopefully you are now seeing a cover page. So yeah, I'm going to talk about some of the trends with the point that I want to make being that migration is down right now, but don't expect the fact that there is a crackdown sort of suppressing migration right now to mean at all that migration is quote unquote solved at the border. Nothing has ever worked in the long term. And despite the fact that we have a hardline administration coming into power, we're likely to see more people coming to the border again sometime within the next couple of years. And I'll show you why I think that. But first, I'm going to zoom way out and just talk about how we got here. I mean, the Biden years did see, admittedly, the largest number of migrants coming to the U.S.-Mexico border in really ever, but sort of similar to what we were seeing at the border at the turn of the century. But at the turn of the century, it was a much different population, as you probably know. I mean, your typical migrant at the time was almost entirely Mexican, and usually a single adult, usually a male adult, usually somebody looking for work. And now, of course, you have a wide variety of countries. Mexico is blue in this chart going back to 2007. Central American countries are green, brown, and yellow. And you can see that as recently as like 2011, almost every migrant was still being apprehended by Border Patrol was still from Mexico. And, you know, as recently as 2020, 90% of migrants were still from Mexico, Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras. After the pandemic, new routes opened. People just up and decided they had to leave from all over the world, really. But especially things like the Darien Gap and other ways of getting to the United States made the border accessible to a much wider variety of countries, and also countries that no matter who's president, ICE will have trouble deporting a lot of people to. So you are going to see much more variety. Last year, 55% of migrants were from Mexico, or what we used to call the Northern Triangle. And that would have been unthinkable even before the pandemic. Also, as much as almost 1 out of 2. Last year, 43% of migrants coming to the border now are either children or parents with children. And that was unthinkable, as you can see here, as recently as like 2012, when we at WOLA started paying more attention to the border. That proportion keeps increasing, and you know it well. I mean, some single adults try to turn themselves in and seek asylum at the border. Nearly all children and families turn themselves in and seek them assistance or seek protection at the border. And yeah, that was just not what was happening but before. It's a population that now Border Patrol, in its majority, does not have to chase. Um, and this is sort of just zooming in a little bit over the last 5 years at the border. You did see this increase. This is combining people who come into Border Patrol custody, but also people who show up at the ports of entry with CBP-1 appointments usually. And you can see that 2024 was a year of decline. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But right now, migration is at its pretty much its lowest point at the end of the Biden administration of the entire Biden administration. Um, it has been more possible, as Border Servant Corps knows very well. It's now possible to make an appointment to come to a port of entry to seek asylum using the CBP-1 app. This is how CBP-1 appointments have broken down since the beginning of 2023 when the program started. But CBP does keep this artificial cap of 1,450 people per day, and also seems to have an informal quota system for countries to try to keep one country from like dominating the population of people who get those appointments. So it has been flat since the summer of 2023. Even now, when there is a great incentive maybe to get people into the system before Trump takes over and shuts all of this down, and CBP-1 is almost certain to disappear on January 20th, even now, CBP and the Biden administration, despite pleas from the entire community, has not increased CBP-1 appointments. So a lot of people who are stranded in Mexico right now without an appointment are not going to have an option on January 20th. So this zooming in on what happened in 2024, these are Border Patrol apprehensions. You see, Mexico was convinced by the Biden administration after a record-breaking month in 2023. You might remember in El Paso when they closed the railroad bridge because they needed personnel to go process people at other ports of, at the Border Patrol stations. Mexico was encouraged to crack down. And since then, Mexican forces have been intercepting migrants and sending more than 10,000 a month to this southern part of the country, sort of wearing them out in sort of what they're calling the merry-go-round strategy. The initiation of that strategy caused migration to plummet by 50% in a single month. That's the largest 1 month or the steepest 1 month decline in migration that we know of this century for the data that we have going back to 2020. And you can see that it cut migration in half. It stayed that way until the middle of the year when, here's what Mexico's operations have looked like since the end of 2023. Just a historic hockey stick increase in the number of people who Mexican forces have been stopping on their way across Mexican territory. And then in June, migration halves again after the Biden administration cuts off, passes this rule, cutting off asylum to anybody who crosses the border between ports of entry, sort of channeling people who can make it into CBP-1, but everyone else is pretty much subject to deportation, and their pleas for protection get ignored if they cross between the ports of entry. And yeah, that's why for now, excuse me, for now, this crackdown has brought migration to very low levels. A result of this is that the number of people who are being released from custody from Border Patrol, border wide, is at a very low level. That's the blue and the green in this chart. Those who are what the right likes to call caught and released. It's down at more than 95% since that record-breaking month of December. People are simply being deported, or if there's detention space for them, they're being detained. A lot of the people who are being released now are the few thousand unaccompanied children who are arriving. So Border Servant Corps wouldn't, or no shelter would see them because they go straight to Office of Refugee Resettlement custody. So here's where we are. The preliminary numbers we've seen is that November was even lower. Really, the fewest Border Patrol apprehensions at the border since July of 2020, a few months into the pandemic. Fewer than during 15 different months of the Trump administration. And of course, you do have people claiming that this is a quote unquote success. I mean, you've cut off access to asylum, you've undone much of a right that was enshrined in US law in 1980. But it has made the border quieter, at least between the ports of entry, and it's remained that way. We thought that after this is weekly apprehensions on the top in San Diego, in the middle in Tucson, at the bottom in El Paso, the three busiest sectors, where it just so happens that Border Patrol chiefs and municipal authorities do post numbers on a weekly basis, sort of informally, and you can see everything plummeting after the asylum rule in June. That's that first red line. And then the second red line is election day. A lot of us thought we might be seeing migrants trying to rush to get to the border after election day, and before inauguration day. Seems reasonable, right? You'd want to get to be on US soil and ask for protection any way you can, or even evade Border Patrol before Trump comes to office and cracks down. That certainly happened in late 2016. We're not seeing it yet. The numbers do remain down despite the outcome of the election. So now I'm going to zoom way in and talk about this sort of roller coaster that we've been on for the last 10 years. So we've sort of seen this before. So like after 9/11, and throughout, the 2000s, the Bush and at least the first part of the Obama administration, as I said, your average migrant was a single adult from Mexico. That started to change in late 2013, but especially in the spring of 2014. Some of you have been doing this for a while. Remember that the news was dominated in the United States for at least a week or two in April, May of 2014, as there was this sudden large-scale arrival of families and unaccompanied children from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras that completely it blindsided CBP and Border Patrol. They didn't know what to do. You had kids sleeping for weeks on the floors of Border Patrol stations. The people were turning themselves in, and they completely, CBP still doesn't really know what to do when this sort of thing happens. But at the time, these were people trained to confront an enemy and go chase bad guys in the desert. And here they are with having to change diapers, and they did not know what to do. But it's this big spike in arrivals. And that is followed as in a pattern that we will see forever. The Obama administration decides to crack down, and the main way that crackdown happens is convincing Mexico to increase its blockage of people trying to make it north through their territory through Central America. And the United States gives some assistance to Mexican security forces and migration forces for what was called the Plan Frontera Sur, an effort to really get a lot more presence and intelligence and roadblocks and other mechanisms in Chiapas and also along the whole route through Mexico. And numbers go down for a while. But like a lot of Mexican crackdowns, they end up being kind of permeable and they end up kind of eroding. There's a lot of corruption. Eventually, people who pay enough get waved through the checkpoints, and the numbers recovered all through the rest of the Obama administration. And then in that fall of 2016, you were seeing numbers starting to approach what we were seeing in the spring of 2014. Again, mostly kids and families, also a large contingent of Haitians. This was the first time we saw people from Haiti who had been trying to live in Brazil in Chile, giving up on that, going all the way through South America, really opening up the Darien Gap Trail through Panama that had never really been used before in coming to the US border. They had largely been approaching ports of entry because that was the days before metering. Cubans were doing this too, showing up and asking for asylum at the ports. But then particularly in Tijuana and San Diego, CBP started metering. And that's the practice of putting a guard or CBP officer on the line, asking for people's papers. And if they don't have papers, telling them to come back later, we're full, and not processing them for asylum. But anyway, so that pushed a lot more people also to cross between ports of entry, although still mostly a Central American population here. And then something interesting happens. January 2021, Trump is inaugurated, and just some word gets out in smuggling circles, word of mouth among migrants that the big, mean, anti-immigrant president is taking over. Don't come. Now, in the first few months of the Trump administration, no policies actually changed. There's the Muslim ban and things like that, but nothing that really affects the border. But still, there's everybody goes into wait and see mode. And that month there that you see, April of 2017, remains the lowest month for Border Patrol migrant apprehensions of the entire 21st century. All the data we have, that's the smallest number, smaller than the first months of the COVID pandemic, as we'll see, just because people were like, let's hold off and see what Trump's going to do. Ultimately, he wasn't really doing very much. And guess what? Once again, crackdown leads to numbers recovering pretty quickly. By the spring of 2018, Donald Trump is tweeting, just rage tweeting about the caravans that are forming in southern Mexico, and they start the zero tolerance / family separation policy, which does cause, while it's happening, some incredible cruelty, but also maybe about a 15% reduction in the number of people coming to the United States because they hear, what will happen to them if they turn themselves into Border Patrol. But still, even in June and July, at the height of the family separation crisis, you see a lot of people risking it all with their kids to try to seek asylum. Really gives you a sense of the desperation. And, finally, the judge tells Trump to cut it out with the family separation. He cuts it out. And really just the numbers just skyrocket. As you can see, the spring of 2019, I think El Paso saw quite a bit of this. You have much more arrivals of families. You start seeing more people from Cuba, and even a handful from Venezuela and Nicaragua starting to come in that spring. And of course, Trump is absolutely enraged, threatens Mexico with tariffs. Sounds familiar? If Mexico doesn't crack down more. And one of the main things Mexico agrees to is a major expansion of the Remain in Mexico program. And over this period that you can see, about 70,000 people from Central America, from Cuba, and elsewhere in Spanish-speaking, actually also Brazil, Spanish-speaking, no, not Brazil, I take it back. Spanish-speaking Latin America are made to await their asylum dates in U.S. immigration courts on the Mexican side of the border. And of course, those of you who were, visiting shelters in Juarez while this was happening just saw how full they were with families staying for months. Shelters that had been formed really to receive, single adult deportees a few years ago were now taking families in from Central America for months and months at a time as they waited their appointments, which almost always ended up with asylum denials. And then this last month you see there, April 2020, that's the first full month of COVID restrictions. So while Remain in Mexico is happening, you can see its effectiveness starts leveling off. And normally I would have expected the last half of 2020 to have seen a recovery and migration starting to pop up again after the crackdown. But Title 42 happens. All of the world's borders close, but Title 42 in the United States meant that, of course, anybody crossing the border and being apprehended would be immediately returned without a chance to ask for asylum. And Mexico agreed to take back citizens of Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, as well as Mexican citizens, as expulsions. And, that meant you were usually in the United States for an hour and a half. They wouldn't even really process you. They'd send you back. You were never actually officially considered to have been in the United States, so there wasn't much of a penalty for being here. But despite even that, this is the rest of the Trump administration from April until Inauguration Day of 2021. It's a hockey stick. People are coming regardless of Title 42. Often because they can try several times. If you're expelled, it didn't count to your record, but also, people are just desperate, and even more so as the economies of the region cratered, and organized crime remained even stronger. So that's going on when Trump hands off to Biden. So when you want to say the Trump administration really limited migration, it did not. It cracked down, but those never had permanent effects. But of course, then you get the Biden administration. And Biden doesn't really change policy that much. He does away with Remain in Mexico, but that didn't exist at the time because Title 42 had eclipsed it. And he has a more gentle rhetoric toward migrants, and maybe that inspired some people to try to come. I think what really changes here is that you've got a lot more colors in these lines. You start seeing more people coming from elsewhere in the world, particularly. They don't even show. They show sort of in the other countries here. Haitians start coming in big numbers in 2021, and you got this increase in Central Americans and Haitians. There was a time in the summer of 2021 where it was believed that they were going to start scaling back Title 42, and that might have inspired rumors of people to come, but ultimately, that doesn't happen. That big gray other countries category in the very last line there is largely Haitian, because September of 2021 is when the Del Rio horse patrol incident happens, where the famous pictures of the border patrol agents charging at the Haitian migrants on the banks of the Rio Grande in Eagle Pass and in Del Rio. Um, After that, there is this massive airlift of Haitians and something of a crackdown, that causes the numbers to go down a little bit, just a modest crackdown, but you never really see Haitians try to cross the border between the ports of entry after that. But yes, once again, the numbers recover. There's a little interregnum there in the summer of 2022 when Mexico is convinced to take back, I believe it was Cuban and Venezuelan migrants, known as Cuban Haitian migrants, just for 2 months. There was a belief that Title 42 was going to be lifted after that, and it wasn't. So Mexico said, nope, we're not taking them anymore. And then the numbers kept going up. And there you can see the purple. You see this. Well, first you see, oh, this is interesting too. You see the, like the nice pretty blue, the turquoise blue, that's Venezuelans. They disappear almost near the end, because that's when in October of 2022, Mexico is convinced to take Venezuelans back over the border as expulsions under Title 42. Venezuelans stop, but you don't notice a decrease in the migrant population at all because the purple increases. And remember, like 2 years ago in El Paso, when there were just Nicaraguans all on the streets and backed up and out of the shelters, Nicaraguans all came at once at the end of 2022. And now you see the crackdowns really start. In January 2023, Mexico is convinced to take Cubans, Venezuelans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans as expulsions under Title 42, and those nationalities plummet. But once again, uh, it's a short-lived crackdown. More people start coming because, again, no other choice. The push factors remain the same. And then Title 42 finally ends in May of 2023, and that sends people back into wait and see mode. The numbers go down for a while, but only for a little while. And then you hit a record level in December. And then you're back to what I was just talking about with Mexico cracking down and then the Biden asylum rule. So yeah, numbers are low here, but look at this experience. There's no reason to think that things have changed. You have repressive governments, you have organized crime, you have domestic violence, you have gang activity, you have hunger and unemployment, you have people wanting to be reunited with their families. All of the push factors remain at least as strong as they've ever been. And so there's no reason to think that we're not going to see those lines go up again sometime in the next year or two. Again, probably not at all during the first half, two-thirds, three-quarters of 2025, maybe not even all of 2025, because the Trump administration is going to come in, it's going to be on the rampage, and people are going to go into wait and see mode. But by 2026, I mean, my crystal ball could be cracked, but it's hard to imagine that the numbers of people trying to come to the United States won't start to increase again. And while this is all happening, by the way, there's all the people who are trying not to be caught. The El Paso sector and Doña Ana County in particular have been just horribly hit by this in the last year, a couple of years. People are going to try to go through the deserts. They're going to try to climb the border wall. They're going to try to swim through the Rio Grande, and we're going to see more deaths. I need to update this because the folks at No More Deaths just got an incredible data set through FOIA out of CBP. So we now actually know the reason of the cause of death, nationality, gender, and things like that for all of these deaths over most of these years. And I just haven't had a chance to update this yet. All right, that was my main thing, and thanks for being the guinea pigs of that. I'd like to make a little video there making that point that no crackdown ever works beyond the short term. Um, Ali and we've been talking about maybe just giving a quick overview of how Trump could crack down, how he could use the military, what some of the legal authorities are. This is too much to go under right now, but very quickly. Um, Presidents could declare national emergencies to sort of move money around or do other things that sort of break normal checks and balances. He did that, for instance, to grab a lot of money out of the Defense Department to build a border wall during his first term. In order to strike down a national emergency declaration, both houses of Congress have to pass a resolution disapproving it by a two-thirds majority, which is pretty unlikely to happen right now. So we could see a lot of national emergencies. Now, Trump can't do that just to bring in the military and send them to go round people up. He would have to use a different law for that. Now, there's the Alien Enemies Act, which allows the United States to detain and expel people just based on their nationality, unbelievably. But in order to do that, there has to be, something like a declared war or a really strong likelihood of invasion. I don't think courts are going to buy the idea that asylum seekers are an invasion. We're not, our justice system isn't that far gone yet. So I don't think we have too much to worry about from the Alien Enemies Act if they try to use it. I am worried about the Insurrection Act. And that was last used during the LA riots in 1992. Eisenhower used it to integrate some schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And that lets the president use the military for domestic purposes, almost any domestic purpose, as long as you can see there, he finds there's like obstructions, rebellion, that are getting in the way of the ordinary course of judicial proceedings. It's a very vague definition that he can use from this 1807 law, and the courts have tended to side with the president on how he uses his discretion on whether to use the military. So if he wants to use the military for mass deportation or other or even to put down protesters, this is probably what he'll use, and it's very scary. The way that Tom Homan has been saying that they would use the military for mass deportation is that soldiers themselves or National Guardsmen won't be like kicking in the doors and grabbing people. And I hope not, because these are people trained for combat and defeating an enemy. But they may be driving the buses, flying the planes, running the the staging camps for pre-deportation, like the facility that they're going to apparently lease in Starr County. That Section 2808 authority is one that Trump used in part to start funding the border wall out of defense money. It says that you can do construction on military facilities. And for instance, they would probably use 2808 if they wanted to take money from the Pentagon to build staging camps for deporting people. And then another big, very vague one is Section 502F of the US Code for just about any reason. The president can ask a red state governor to just lend the National Guard to this effort, however it is, and like rounding people up or putting down protests. And it looks like as long as they nominally remain under the governor's command, with the U.S. federal government paying the costs for them, the Indiana governor can send troops to the Bronx to go round up migrants if they want. As long as it's all nominally under their command. All this would be challenged in courts, but the laws are really written very vaguely. So this scares me as somebody who's studied civil military relations in Latin America for a long time. Now, I mean, Ali already talked about the guardrails. Some things that we're sort of counting on are, first of all, just incompetence, big egos, big personalities, people not getting along. It certainly happened plenty in the last Trump term. You had a lot of personnel changes and a lot of people getting in their own way. The courts are still there and have stopped a lot. And ACLU and many other groups are right now preparing their defenses. All they need are plaintiffs once some of these policies go into effect. I think that public opinion, which has been sort of drifting away from us lately, could improve, especially if the Trump administration's cruelty, as happened with family separation in 2018, becomes very evident. And of course, Congress is always there right now. The Republican Party does have the majority of both houses. One advantage may be that we may have more of an in with Democratic Party moderates. Who have been drifting away from us lately. And before I stop with Congress and hand off, and I've been talking too long, here are the key dates on the congressional schedule. You've got Noam's and others nomination hearings and votes in January. Reconciliation is going to be a package of border budget items that they're going to put through the Senate on a simple majority vote, probably in January and February. It could be more than $100 billion. We can talk about that some more. You have the regular budget process. They still haven't approved this year's budget, so there's more input. Anyway, all of these things on that list are opportunities to weigh in with congressional staff, to introduce ourselves, and to make ourselves useful to new members, to committees. Here are some questions you can ask. Here are some amendments you can support, etc. Here are some talking points, and that's a good way for all of us to develop relationships. All right, so thanks for listening to all of that. That was quite a mishmash of topics, but I'm happy to share those slides and stuff if they're useful.